The morning Evelyn first saw written words, she was 7 years old, standing in the doorway of the Whitmore Plantation library while her mother scrubbed the floors. Sunlight caught the spine of a leather-bound book, and the golden letters seemed to burn themselves into her vision. She didn't know what they meant, but something inside her recognized them, the way a bird knows to fly south before winter comes. Her mother, Sarah, noticed her daughter's fixed stare and pulled her away sharply, fingers digging into the thin shoulder. "Don't you ever let them catch you looking at those," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Books ain't for us. Looking gets you sold. Understanding gets you killed." But it was already too late. The symbols had taken root in Evelyn's mind like seeds in fertile soil. The Whitmore Plantation stretched across 2,000 acres of red Georgia clay, cotton fields that ran to the horizon like a white sea. The main house sat on a small hill, a colonial mansion with white columns that gleamed in the morning sun, a monument to wealth built on suffering. 300 souls lived in bondage there, working from dawn until their hands bled, sleeping in wooden shacks that let in the rain and cold. What are you thinking about this story? Your opinion is incredibly important to us. Please subscribe, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and let us know if you're enjoying this tale. We truly value your feedback. It helps us create better content for you. Master Jonathan Whitmore ruled his domain with calculated cruelty. He was a tall man, with thin lips and eyes the color of winter ice, a man who believed that slavery was not just economics, but divine order. His wife, Catherine, spent her days in the parlor, playing piano and pretending not to hear the screams from the punishment yard. Their son, Thomas, was 23, recently returned from the University of Virginia with a head full of Enlightenment philosophy and a heart still learning his father's hardness. Evelyn grew up in the servants' quarters, a cramped cabin she shared with her mother and 4 other women. The nights were long and filled with whispered prayers, exhausted breathing, and the sounds of grief that had no other outlet. But Evelyn's mind never rested. While others slept, she stared at the ceiling beams, counting them, calculating their dimensions, replaying every conversation she'd heard that day word for word. Her mother had been born on the plantation, as had her mother before her. The line stretched back to chains and shipholds, and a homeland that existed now only in songs sung low on Sunday evenings. Sarah was a house servant, trusted enough to clean the family's private rooms, but never quite invisible enough to be truly safe. She had seen girls like Evelyn before, bright ones, curious ones. She had seen what happened to them. "You got to make yourself small," Sarah told her daughter again and again. "Don't ask questions. Don't show what you know. Smart girls get noticed, and noticed girls get sold away or worse." But Evelyn couldn't help herself. By age 10, she had memorized every sermon delivered at the plantation chapel, could recite them backwards if asked. By 12, she was solving arithmetic problems she overheard Thomas discussing with his tutor, working the numbers in her head while she swept the hallways. By 15, she had taught herself to read by stealing glances at newspapers left on the master's desk, matching the shapes of letters to sounds she remembered from his reading aloud. She never wrote anything down, never spoke of what she understood. But the knowledge accumulated inside her like water behind a dam, pressing against its constraints, threatening to break through. The other enslaved people noticed something different about her. Old Moses, who tended the horses, said she had the sight, that she could predict when storms were coming by reading the clouds, when someone was going to die by the way they walked. Young Ruth, who worked in the kitchen, swore that Evelyn once recited an entire conversation Ruth had had in private, word for word, though Evelyn had been nowhere near. "That girl ain't natural," the overseer, a brutal man named Cobb, muttered more than once. "Got something wrong with her. Eyes too bright, too quiet, watching everything." Cobb was a thick man with sunburned skin and hands like ham hocks, hands that had broken bones and torn flesh. He carried a whip coiled at his belt like a snake, and he used it liberally. He had tried to beat the strangeness out of Evelyn once, when she was 14, and he caught her staring at the account books in the plantation office. 20 lashes that left her back a map of scars. She never cried, never screamed. Just looked at him with those dark, burning eyes, and Cobb later told the other overseers that it was like being watched by something that understood him better than he understood himself. He avoided her after that, and that avoidance was perhaps the only mercy Evelyn ever received. The spring of 1823 arrived with unseasonable warmth, the dogwoods blooming early, and the fields turning green before their time. Thomas Whitmore returned from a trip to Boston with a guest, a thin man in spectacles who carried leather cases full of instruments and books. His name was Dr. Marcus Holbrook, and he was a naturalist and phrenologist, one of the new breed of scientists who believed they could measure intelligence and character by the shape of a person's skull. The household buzzed with the excitement of a visitor. Extra candles were lit, the good china brought out, a pig slaughtered for the welcome dinner. Evelyn and her mother were among those chosen to serve, moving silently around the dining table as the men talked. Dr. Holbrook spoke in the clipped accent of New England, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who believed he understood the fundamental order of the universe. The cranial measurements don't lie, Thomas. The African skull is demonstrably smaller, the frontal lobe less developed. It's simple biology. They are suited for labor, as we are suited for thought. Ah. Thomas nodded along, eager to impress his learned guest. My father has always said the same. Natural hierarchy, written in bone and blood. Evelyn poured wine, her hands steady, her face a careful mask. But she was listening to every word, her mind cataloguing their errors, their assumptions, their profound ignorance dressed up as science. Dr. Holbrook continued, warming to his subject. I've measured over 300 skulls now, published my findings in the Boston Medical Journal. The pattern is irrefutable. Caucasian supremacy is not opinion, it is measurable fact. Cranium maximum est ubi intellectus minimus est, Evelyn said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The conversation died. Both men turned to stare at her. What did you say? Dr. Holbrook's voice was sharp, suspicious. Evelyn's mother went rigid with fear. Master Whitmore, seated at the head of the table, set down his knife with deliberate slowness. She said nothing, Catherine Whitmore interjected quickly, trying to diffuse the moment. Just muttering, they do that. No, Dr. Holbrook stood, moving toward Evelyn. That was Latin. Perfect, classical Latin. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. Where did you learn that? Who taught you? Evelyn met his gaze directly. No one taught me. I heard you speaking earlier in the library. You were reading Cicero. You made 3 grammatical errors. And your translation of the Aristotle passage was imprecise. The room went silent. Sarah made a small, broken sound in her throat. That's impossible, Dr. Holbrook breathed. You're saying you understand Latin, that you can identify errors in classical translation. The skull size matters not where the intellect is great, Evelyn said, translating her earlier words. That's what I said. It's from Seneca, though you wouldn't know that because you misquoted him in your paper on cranial capacity. I read it when Master Thomas left it on the desk last month. Thomas stood so quickly, his chair fell backwards. Father, she's been reading our papers, our private correspondence. Master Whitmore's face had gone pale, then flushed deep red. How long? He demanded. How long have you been reading? Since I was 8, Evelyn said. There was no point in hiding any more. The dam had broken. I can read anything. English, Latin, Greek. I taught myself by watching, by listening. Mathematics too. Your plantation accounts are inefficient. You're losing money on crop rotation. Your son's philosophy papers are derivative, mostly plagiarized from Locke and Hume, without proper attribution. Dr. Holbrook was staring at her with an expression that mixed fascination and horror. This is unprecedented. I must examine her. Thomas, your father, this could revolutionize everything we understand about racial capacity. This is an abomination, Master Whitmore said, his voice shaking. This is unnatural, demonic. But Dr. Holbrook was already circling Evelyn like she was a specimen in a jar. Her skull structure, it should be impossible. The frontal development, the cranial capacity, I must measure her. I must test her. This could make my career. Proof that exceptions exist, anomalies that challenge the general rule, or proof that your theories are built on sand and prejudice, Evelyn said quietly. The slap came from Master Whitmore, hard enough to snap her head to the side. You will speak when spoken to. You will show respect. Blood trickled from Evelyn's split lip, but she didn't touch it. I've shown you more respect than your intelligence deserves. Sarah lunged forward, trying to pull her daughter away, apologizing frantically. But it was too late. Lock her in the north room, Master Whitmore ordered. No one speaks of this, no one. Dr. Holbrook, you will have your examination, but quietly, I will not have word spread that I've raised a thing like this under my roof. They took Evelyn that night, pulling her from her mother's arms while Sarah screamed and begged. They locked her in a room on the 3rd floor of the main house, a small chamber with barred windows that had once been used for storing valuable documents. The irony wasn't lost on Evelyn. She sat on the narrow bed and looked out at the stars, mapping constellations, calculating distances, her mind racing through everything she knew and everything she was about to face. Outside her door, she could hear them arguing in heated whispers about what to do with the unnatural slave girl, whose existence challenged everything they believed about the world and their place in it. And in that moment, Evelyn understood that knowledge was the most dangerous thing a slave could possess. Not because it would set her free, but because it revealed the chains binding everyone, enslaved and enslaver alike. The testing began at dawn. Dr. Holbrook arrived at Evelyn's locked room, carrying a leather case filled with instruments that gleamed like surgical tools. Behind him, Master Whitmore stood with his arms crossed, his face set in hard lines. Thomas lingered in the doorway, curiosity and unease fighting for dominance in his expression. "Sit," Dr. Holbrook commanded, pointing to a straight-backed chair positioned in the center of the room. Evelyn complied, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She had spent the night thinking through what was coming, preparing herself for the violation she knew was inevitable. They would try to make sense of her, to categorize her, to find some explanation that didn't shatter their understanding of the world. Dr. Holbrook produced a set of calipers, cold metal instruments designed to measure the dimensions of her skull. He worked in silence, pressing the points against her temples, the crown of her head, the base of her neck, calling out numbers that Thomas dutifully recorded in a leather journal. Cranial circumference, 22.3 inches, Dr. Holbrook murmured. Frontal bone development exceptional. This doesn't align with established measurements for the Negro race, not at all. Perhaps your established measurements are wrong, Evelyn said. The caliper points pressed harder against her skull, enough to hurt. You will not speak unless asked a direct question. For the next hour, they measured everything, the width of her jaw, the distance between her eyes, the angle of her brow. Dr. Holbrook sketched diagrams, made notes in cramped handwriting, occasionally muttering to himself in Latin as if Evelyn wouldn't understand. Then came the memory tests. Dr. Holbrook read a passage from Homer's Odyssey in Greek, a full page of dense verse. When he finished, he looked at her expectantly. "Recite it back to me." Evelyn closed her eyes and spoke the passage word for word, her pronunciation flawless. When she finished, she added, "You mispronounced the word for wine, dark sea, in line 7. It's oinopa, not oinepa." Dr. Holbrook's hand trembled slightly as he made another note. The mathematical tests came next. Complex equations, problems in geometry and algebra that would challenge university students. Evelyn solved them in her head, faster than Thomas could write down the answers. When Dr. Holbrook presented her with a logic puzzle that had stumped his colleagues at Harvard, she solved it in under 3 minutes. "How?" Dr. Holbrook demanded. "How is this possible? No formal education, no training, no access to advanced texts." "I listen," Evelyn said simply. "I remember everything I hear, everything I see. When Master Thomas read his philosophy assignments aloud to practice his rhetoric, I memorized them. When the traveling preacher quoted scripture, I memorized the passages and cross-referenced them with the Bible in the library when I was sent to dust. I taught myself Greek by comparing the English Bible to the Greek translation. Logic is just pattern recognition, and mathematics is the language of patterns." Master Whitmore, who had been watching in increasingly disturbed silence, finally spoke. "This is devil's work. No natural creature could do this." "On the contrary," Dr. Holbrook said, his scientific fascination overriding his discomfort. This is the most extraordinary mind I've ever encountered. Her memory appears to be eidetic. Her processing speed is unprecedented. If she were white, if she were male, she would be celebrated as one of the great intellects of our age." But she's not," Master Whitmore said flatly. "She's property, and dangerous property at that." Thomas moved closer, studying Evelyn with new eyes. "What do you think about when you're working in the fields? What goes through your mind?" It was the first time any of them had asked her a question as if she were a person rather than a specimen. Evelyn looked at him directly. "I think about freedom. I think about the logical inconsistencies in the arguments used to justify slavery. I think about how men who claim to value reason and liberty can torture and enslave other human beings without seeing the contradiction. I think about how your philosophy books speak of inalienable rights and natural law, while I sleep in a shack with a dirt floor. I think about how your father reads the Bible on Sunday and whips people on Monday. I think about the mathematics of cruelty, how evil compounds itself generation after generation." The room fell silent. Thomas's face had gone pale. "You see," Master Whitmore said to Dr. Holbrook, "this is why they can't be educated. This is why reading is forbidden. Give them knowledge and they question the natural order. They become dangerous." "Or perhaps," Evelyn said softly, "the natural order was never natural at all. Perhaps it's just violence dressed up in pretty words and bad science." Master Whitmore backhanded her across the face, hard enough to knock her from the chair. "I should have you whipped. I should have you sold to the sugar plantations in Louisiana, where your cleverness won't matter." Evelyn tasted blood again, but she pulled herself up to sitting. "You won't. Because Dr. Holbrook wants to study me more, because I'm valuable to him, because somewhere in your hatred and fear you're curious. You want to understand how something you considered subhuman can think circles around your university-educated son." Thomas flinched, but didn't argue. "Doctor." Holbrook helped Evelyn back into the chair, his touch gentler now. "She's right, Jonathan. This is a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. I need more time, more tests. I could write a paper that would revolutionize our understanding of what?" Master Whitmore interrupted. "That our entire social structure is built on a lie, that we've enslaved people as intelligent as ourselves. What good does that knowledge do anyone?" "The truth is always good," Dr. Holbrook insisted. "The truth is dangerous," Master Whitmore corrected, "and she is the most dangerous thing I've ever owned." They left her locked in the room, but they brought her books. Dr. Holbrook couldn't resist the experiment, couldn't resist seeing how far her capabilities extended. He gave her advanced mathematics texts, philosophical treatises, medical journals. Each day he would return and question her. And each day she would demonstrate perfect comprehension, offering insights and critiques that left him both amazed and unsettled. At night, Evelyn could hear her mother crying in the servants' quarters below, a sound that cut deeper than any whip. She could hear the whispered conversations among the enslaved people, their fear that her discovery would bring punishment on everyone. Cobb the overseer had already increased the beatings, angry that one of them had made him look foolish, angry that the natural order he believed in was being questioned. A week into her confinement, Thomas visited alone. He brought a chess set, carved ivory pieces on a board of inlaid wood. "My tutor taught me this game. They say it's the ultimate test of strategic thinking. Will you play?" Evelyn had never touched chess pieces before, but she had watched Thomas play through the library window. She understood the rules, the possibilities, the strategies. They played 3 games. She won all 3, each more quickly than the last. Thomas sat back, a strange expression on his face. "My father wants to sell you. Dr. Holbrook wants to take you to Boston, keep you in his laboratory like a caged bird. They're arguing about it constantly. And what do you want?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I want to understand how everything I was taught is wrong. I want to know what else I've believed that isn't true. But I'm also afraid, because if you're my equal in mind, if you deserve the same rights I have, then everything my family has built, everything we are, is founded on monstrous injustice, and I don't know what to do with that truth." "You could free us," Evelyn said. "I can't. The debts, the obligations, the entire economy, it's all interconnected. Freeing slaves would destroy us financially, socially. It would mean acknowledging that my grandfather, my father, myself, that we've all been monsters." "You have been," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "But monsters can choose to stop being monstrous. That's what separates you from actual beasts. You have the capacity for change, for moral growth. The question is whether you have the courage." Thomas stood abruptly. "I'll bring you more books tomorrow. Dr. Holbrook wants to test your Latin composition." After he left, Evelyn sat alone in the darkening room. Through the barred window, she could see the slave quarters, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the dirt between the shacks. She could see the cotton fields stretching toward the horizon, white bowls ready for harvest, each one stained with suffering. Her mind was a weapon they had accidentally armed. Her knowledge was a fire they had accidentally lit. And now they were terrified of what she might burn down. But Evelyn was patient. She had spent her whole life being patient, being careful, being invisible. Now that she was seen, now that they understood what she was capable of, she could begin to plan. Because if they thought an intelligent slave was dangerous, they had no idea how dangerous a slave who understood the full scope of her oppression could become. The chess pieces sat on the table, frozen in their final configuration. Checkmate. The word meant, "The king is dead" in Persian. Evelyn had learned that from one of Dr. Holbrook's books. She wondered if they understood the symbolism. Dr. Holbrook's obsession grew with each passing day. He transformed the locked room into a makeshift laboratory, bringing in more instruments, more books, more tests designed to probe the limits of Evelyn's capabilities. Master Whitmore allowed it, though his discomfort was palpable every time he stood in the doorway, watching the scientist interact with his property as if she were a colleague rather than chattel. On the 9th day of testing, Dr. Holbrook brought something different, vials of his own blood and a small medical kit. "I want to examine your blood under the microscope," he explained, preparing a needle. "There may be physiological differences that account for your extraordinary abilities. Differences we can measure, quantify, understand." Evelyn extended her arm without protest. The needle pierced her skin, and dark blood welled into the glass tube. Dr. Holbrook worked with the focused intensity of a man pursuing revelation, mixing her blood with various solutions, placing slides under his brass microscope. Hours passed. The afternoon light shifted through the barred window, casting prison-striped shadows across the floor. Finally, Dr. Holbrook looked up, his face troubled. "There's no difference. Your blood is identical to mine in every measurable way. The cells, the composition, everything. It's exactly as I feared." "Feared?" Evelyn asked. "Hoped for, I suppose I should say. For science, but feared for what it means." He removed his spectacles and cleaned them with shaking hands. If there's no biological difference, if your mind is simply superior through some accident of nature or divine providence, then the entire foundation of racial science is built on fabrication. All my work, all my measurements, all my publications, they're attempts to justify a conclusion I already believed, rather than investigations seeking truth. Yes, Evelyn said simply. Dr. Holbrook paced the small room. But you must understand what this means. If I publish these findings, if I reveal your existence to the world, it won't free you. It won't free anyone. It will simply make you a curiosity, an anomaly. They'll say you're one exception that proves the rule, or worse, they'll dissect you to find out what makes you different. They're already dissecting me, Evelyn pointed out, just more slowly. That evening, raised voices echoed through the main house. Evelyn pressed her ear to the door and listened to the argument raging in Master Whitmore's study. "You've spent enough time with this creature," Whitmore was saying. "I want her gone, sold south where her intelligence won't matter because the work will kill her in 5 years anyway." "You can't," Dr. Holbrook protested. "She's invaluable. The scientific community needs to know." "The scientific community can go to hell. I need to know that my authority isn't being questioned by my own property. Every day she's here, every slave on this plantation wonders why she gets special treatment. They wonder what else might be possible. She's creating ideas that will get people killed." "Ideas can't be killed," Thomas interjected. "Even if you sell her, even if she dies, what we've learned remains. She's proven that everything we believe about natural hierarchy is a comfortable lie." "Then we keep that lie," Whitmore snapped, "because without it our entire world collapses. You think the slaves will work once they realize there are intellectual equals. You think they'll accept bondage once they understand the full scope of the injustice. This girl is a match near a powder keg, and you want to preserve her for science." The argument continued. But Evelyn had heard enough. She understood her situation perfectly. She was valuable enough to study, but too dangerous to let live. Dr. Holbrook's curiosity bought her time, but eventually even that would run out. She returned to the window and looked out at the night. In the slave quarters, she could see her mother moving between the shacks, distributing food saved from the day's preparations. Sarah had aged 10 years in the past week, worn down by fear for her daughter's fate. The next morning, Dr. Holbrook arrived with new materials, paper, ink, quills. "I want you to write," he said. "Your thoughts on philosophy, mathematics, anything you choose. I want to document your capabilities in your own words." It was a test, Evelyn knew. He wanted to see if she could compose original thoughts or merely parrot back what she'd absorbed. She took the quill, felt its weight, dipped it in the ink. For the first time in her life, she could write freely. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She wrote about the logical contradictions in social contract theory as applied to a society built on slavery. She wrote mathematical proofs, elegant solutions to problems Dr. Holbrook had mentioned as unsolved. She wrote in English, Latin, and Greek, switching between languages to express concepts more precisely. Dr. Holbrook read her pages with growing amazement and growing dread. These insights are profound. You've just solved a mathematical problem that's puzzled scholars for years. This philosophical argument is more sophisticated than anything I've read in recent journals." "Is that surprising?" Evelyn asked. "You've spent days proving I'm intelligent. Did you think intelligence was just party tricks and memory games?" "I suppose I didn't think through what it really meant," Dr. Holbrook admitted. "To have a mind this powerful trapped in circumstances this limiting." He paused. "What would you do if you were free, if you could choose your own path?" Evelyn set down the quill. "I would teach. I would write. I would prove that everything this society believes about racial capacity is a lie built to justify cruelty. I would ensure that no other child has to hide their intelligence for fear of being called unnatural." I would burn down every intellectual foundation of slavery until the entire rotten structure collapsed. That's sedition, Dr. Holbrook said quietly. That's truth, Evelyn corrected. That night, she heard new sounds from below, whispered conversations between Dr. Holbrook and Thomas, their voices urgent and low. She caught fragments. Can't let her be sold. Father will never agree. Might be another way. The following evening, Thomas came alone again. He brought no chess set this time, only a troubled expression and a bottle of wine. Dr. Holbrook wants to help you escape, he said without preamble. He has contacts in the abolitionist movement in Boston. He thinks he can smuggle you north, set you up with a new identity. You could live as a free woman, teach, write, just as you said. And what do you think? Evelyn asked. Thomas poured himself wine with unsteady hands. I think my father is right. I think you're dangerous, but not in the way he means. You're dangerous to lies I've built my entire life around. Comfortable lies about natural order and divine providence and the burden of civilization. Every time I talk to you, those lies crumble a little more. So you'll let me go? I don't know, Thomas said honestly. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks that's the only decent thing to do. But part of me is terrified of what happens when word spreads that an escaped slave is writing abolitionist philosophy in Boston. What happens to my family? What happens to everyone here? You mean what happens to your wealth and social position, Evelyn said, not to the people you own. Thomas flinched but didn't deny it. Yes, I mean that. I'm not pretending to be noble. I'm just trying to decide if I have enough courage to do the right thing when the right thing destroys everything I have. He left the wine bottle. Evelyn didn't drink it, but she studied it carefully, studied the cork, the glass, the deep red color of the liquid inside. 3 days later, Dr. Holbrook fell ill. It started with stomach pains during dinner, progressed to violent convulsions by nightfall. The doctor from town was summoned, but could do nothing. Doctor. Marcus Holbrook died just before dawn. His last words a confused mumbling about measurements and blood, and the lies men tell themselves. Master Whitmore ordered an investigation, but the county physician ruled it death by natural causes, possibly a weak heart triggered by too much rich food and excitement. These things happened, especially to men of a scholarly disposition unused to the southern climate. Evelyn, locked in her room, heard all of this through the walls and ventilation grates. She sat very still, her face expressionless, while Thomas came to give her the news. He's dead, Thomas said, his voice hollow. The man who wanted to save you is dead, and now there's no one to advocate for your value beyond mere property. My father will sell you within the week. I know, Evelyn said. Something in her tone made Thomas look at her more closely. The wine I brought you, where is it? I poured it down the grate. I don't drink. But Dr. Holbrook did. He told me just yesterday how kind it was of Father to provide such excellent wine with dinner. Father never provides excellent wine. Thomas's face went white. What did you do? Evelyn met his gaze steadily. I did what I had to do. Dr. Holbrook was never going to help me escape. He was going to keep me as a prize specimen, a talking animal to further his career. He said as much in his notes, which he foolishly left where I could read them. He planned to take me to Boston, not as a free woman, but as property he would purchase from your father. A research subject. I would have traded one cage for another. So you poisoned him, Thomas whispered. How? The white oleander in your mother's garden. I've watched her prune it. The leaves contain cardiac glycosides. I collected them when I was allowed brief walks in the garden for air, crushed them, steeped them in the wine. The dose was precise, calculated to mimic heart failure in a man of his age and build. Thomas backed away from her, horror and something like awe mixing in his expression. You're a murderer. I'm a survivor, Evelyn corrected, and I'm not done surviving yet. The news of Dr. Holbrook's death spread through the plantation like smoke, carrying with it a sense of unease that even the enslaved people felt. Something had shifted in the big house. Something had broken in the careful order Master Whitmore maintained. Thomas stopped visiting Evelyn's room. For 3 days, she saw no one except the young slave girl who brought her food, a terrified child who wouldn't meet her eyes and trembled when setting down the tray. On the 4th day, Master Whitmore himself came. He stood in the doorway, studying her with the same expression he might use to examine a rabid dog. "Dr. Holbrook's notes are quite extensive," he said finally. "Detailed observations about your capabilities, your intelligence, your remarkable memory. He also noted your violent tendencies, your hatred of your natural station, your potential for disruption." "Did he note his plan to keep me in a cage for the rest of my life?" Evelyn asked. "To use me to further his career while keeping me enslaved? I suppose he left that part out." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You're not human. You're a demon wearing human skin. No natural slave could do what you've done, know what you know." "Then your entire philosophy is wrong," Evelyn said calmly, "because I am as human as you are. I was just never given the chance to prove it until your curiosity overwhelmed your caution." "My son thinks you killed Holbrook, poisoned him." "Your son has a vivid imagination." "Do you deny it?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "I deny that anyone could prove it. Dr. Holbrook died of heart failure, according to the county physician. Unless you want to explain to your neighbors why you were keeping a slave who could read and write and speak Latin locked in your house, I suspect you'll let the matter rest as natural causes." Whitmore's face flushed with anger, but she was right, and they both knew it. Revealing Evelyn's existence would create more problems than it solved. The other plantation owners would wonder why he had allowed such a creature to exist. The enslaved people would wonder what other lies they'd been told. The whole careful fiction of racial hierarchy would crack. "You'll be sold," Whitmore said. "Tomorrow, to a cotton broker from Savannah. He doesn't care about intelligence. He just wants strong backs for the fields." "And what will you tell Thomas?" Evelyn asked. "That you're destroying evidence of his moral awakening, that you're selling away the proof that everything he's been taught is a lie. Thomas will forget you. He'll marry, run this plantation after I'm gone, and maintain the order as it should be." "You don't really believe that," Evelyn said. "I've seen how he looks at those philosophy books now, like they're written in a language he's only just beginning to understand. I've changed him, Master Whitmore. That can't be undone by selling me away." Whitmore stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think you're clever. You think your intelligence makes you special. But at the end of the day, you're still property, still powerless, still nothing." "If I'm nothing," Evelyn replied, "why are you so afraid of me?" He raised his hand to strike her, then stopped himself, lowered it slowly. "Tomorrow," he said. "You're gone tomorrow." That night, Evelyn lay on the narrow bed and calculated possibilities. The cotton broker would take her to Savannah, probably sell her to a larger plantation or directly to the fields. Her intelligence would mean nothing there. She would work until she died, which likely wouldn't be long given the brutal conditions, unless she created another option. The barred window was too small to climb through, but Evelyn had spent weeks studying the room's construction. The floorboards were old, worn. The one near the corner had a slight give, suggesting the nail beneath was loose. She had been working it slowly, carefully, during the long hours alone, using the metal clasp from her dress to pry it loose. Tonight, she finished the work. The board came up silently, revealing the space between floors. Not enough room to climb through, but enough to hide something, or to access the room below. The room below was Master Whitmore's study, where he kept his accounts, his correspondence, his locked cabinet of important documents. Evelyn had been in that study before, forced to clean it under her mother's supervision. She knew its layout, knew where Whitmore kept his letter opener, his ink, his seal. Most importantly, she knew where he kept his blank documents for legal transactions. She worked through the night, patient and precise. The floorboard could be moved just enough to create a gap. She tore strips from the bedsheet, tied them together, created a rope thin enough to fit through. On the end, she attached a small hook fashioned from a bent spoon she had kept from a meal tray. Fishing through the gap, working blind, relying entirely on memory and spatial reasoning, she hooked the letter opener from Whitmore's desk, pulled it up carefully, inch by inch. Then she went to work on the lock of her door. It took hours. The letter opener wasn't designed for lock-picking, but Evelyn understood the mechanism, understood pressure points and tension. She had watched a blacksmith repair the plantation gate locks once, had memorized every step. The lock clicked open just before dawn. The house was silent, the halls dark. Evelyn moved like a ghost, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floors. Down the stairs, past the portraits of Whitmore ancestors who stared from their frames with the same cold eyes as their descendant, into the study. The locked cabinet was more difficult than the door, but Evelyn had time and patience and a mind that understood mechanical systems as if they were mathematical equations. When it finally opened, she found what she needed: blank documents, official seals, the materials to forge freedom papers. She had watched Master Whitmore sign documents dozens of times, had studied his handwriting, the particular flourishes he used, the way he dated and sealed official papers. Now she reproduced them perfectly, creating a document that proclaimed Evelyn Johnson, a name she chose in that moment, to be a freed slave, manumitted by her master for faithful service. It wouldn't hold up under close scrutiny by someone who knew Whitmore's true signature, but it might be enough to get her out of Georgia. Enough to reach the north. She also took something else from the cabinet: Master Whitmore's personal journal. The one where he recorded his true thoughts, unfiltered by the need for social respectability. She flipped through it quickly, finding entries that made her stomach turn. Detailed accounts of beatings, of selling children away from mothers, of using enslaved women without their consent. All described with the casual tone of a man recording the weather. But more damning were his doubts, his moments of conscience quickly suppressed, his acknowledgement that slavery was wrong, even as he practiced it. These pages could destroy him socially, could provide ammunition to abolitionists, could prove that even slaveholders knew the truth about the evil they perpetrated. Evelyn took the journal. She returned to her room, replaced the floorboard, left everything looking undisturbed. Then she waited for morning, for the young slave girl who would bring her breakfast. When the girl arrived, terrified and shaking, Evelyn spoke gently. "I need your help. I need you to deliver a message to my mother. Can you do that?" The girl nodded, too frightened to refuse. "Tell her I'm leaving tonight. Tell her not to mourn, not to draw attention. Tell her I'll find a way to send word when I'm safe. Tell her—" Evelyn's voice caught slightly. "Tell her I love her, and I'm sorry for the danger I've brought." The girl ran off with the message. Evelyn spent the day in apparent calm, eating the food brought to her, sitting by the window, giving no sign of the night's work. When evening came, when the house settled into sleep, Evelyn made her move. She had studied the patrol patterns of the overseers, knew when Cobb made his rounds, knew the gaps in their surveillance. She slipped out through the kitchen door, wearing the plainest dress she could find, her forged papers hidden in the bodice. The night was warm, thick with humidity. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the slave quarters, people talking low, a baby crying, someone singing a work song. She wanted to say goodbye, wanted to see her mother one more time. But she kept walking, through the cotton fields, the plants brushing against her legs, toward the main road that led away from the plantation, toward Savannah, toward the north, and the possibility of freedom. She had walked perhaps a mile when she heard the horse behind her. Thomas Whitmore rode up slowly, his face unreadable in the moonlight. He carried a lantern, and in its light Evelyn could see he was alone. "I knew you'd run," he said. "I've been waiting for it." Evelyn stood very still, calculating whether she could outrun a man on horseback. She couldn't. "Are you going to take me back?" she asked. Thomas dismounted, holding the lantern between them. "I should. It's my duty. It's what my father would expect." "But—" But Dr. Holbrook's death wasn't natural, was it? And I keep thinking about what you said, about monsters choosing to stop being monstrous. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. There's $50 here. Enough to buy passage on a ship north, enough to start somewhere new. Evelyn stared at him, not daring to hope. I read my father's journal, Thomas continued. After you escaped your room, I went to check what else you might have taken. I read what he really thinks, what he really knows about slavery, and I realized that I've been that same kind of coward, knowing the truth and choosing comfort over conscience. He held out the pouch. This doesn't make us even. This doesn't absolve anything. But maybe it's a start. Maybe it's the first step in choosing to be better than what I was raised to be. Evelyn took the money slowly. Your father will know you helped me. Let him know. Let him see that his son has chosen a different path. Thomas looked at her directly. What will you do? In the north? Everything I said I would. Teach, write, fight to end this evil system. Prove that every justification for slavery is a lie. You'll use your real name? No. I'll protect my mother, my people here. I'll write under borrowed names, work through channels, but I'll make sure my words reach everywhere. I'll make sure your father's journal reaches the right people. Thomas nodded slowly. I expected as much. Be careful, Evelyn. There are people who will kill you for what you represent, for the truth you embody. I've been careful my whole life, Evelyn said. Now I'm going to be dangerous. She started to walk away, then turned back. Thomas, thank you. And I'm sorry for what's coming for your family, but not sorry enough to stop. I know, he said. I wouldn't expect you to be. Evelyn disappeared into the darkness, leaving Thomas standing alone with his lantern and his choices. Behind him, the Whitmore Plantation slept, unaware that its most dangerous secret had just walked free. Evelyn reached Savannah in 4 days, traveling by night and hiding during daylight hours. The forged freedom papers got her past 2 checkpoints, though her heart hammered each time a white man studied them, looking for inconsistencies. But Master Whitmore's handwriting was distinctive and well known in Georgia, and her forgery was perfect. The city was a labyrinth of docks and warehouses, merchant houses and slave markets, the smell of salt water mixed with human misery, the sounds of commerce and captivity blending into a constant drone. Evelyn kept her eyes down, moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent a lifetime being overlooked. She found a boarding house that catered to free blacks, run by a severe woman named Mrs. Adelaide, who asked no questions but charged premium rates. The money Thomas had given her was already dwindling. I need passage north, Evelyn told her quietly, to Philadelphia or Boston. Mrs. Adelaide studied her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You got papers. Evelyn showed them. These look good. Too good. You forged them yourself? Does it matter? Matter to me? No. Matter to the slave catchers? Yes. Mrs. Adelaide pulled a pipe from her apron and lit it. There's ships leaving every week for Philadelphia. But they check papers at the dock, and they check again when you arrive up north. One slip, one person who knows the real signature, and you're back in chains. What's the alternative? The Underground Railroad. Network of safe houses, sympathetic captains, routes through the backcountry slower, more dangerous in some ways. But the people running it know how to get folks north without raising suspicions. How do I contact them? Mrs. Adelaide smiled slightly. You already have, girl. What's your real name? Evelyn. Just Evelyn? No family name? Not anymore. I'm leaving that behind. Mrs. Adelaide nodded understanding. Well, just Evelyn. You can stay here 3 days. After that, a man will come. His name is Reverend Marcus, though he ain't really a reverend, and his name ain't really Marcus. He'll take you to the next station. From there, you follow the route until you reach freedom. Understand? Yes. And thank you. Don't thank me yet. Plenty can go wrong between here and Pennsylvania. Those 3 days were the longest of Evelyn's life. She stayed in the small room Mrs. Adelaide provided, working by candlelight on what would become her mission. She began writing, pouring onto pages everything she had learned, everything she understood about slavery's logical contradictions and moral bankruptcy. She wrote essays on natural rights, using the philosopher's own words to dismantle their justifications for bondage. She wrote mathematical analyses of slavery's economic inefficiency, proving it was sustained not by productivity, but by violence. She wrote about Master Whitmore's journal, about the private admissions of evil from a man who publicly defended slavery as righteous. The words flowed from her like blood from a wound, urgent and necessary. On the third night, Reverend Marcus arrived. He was a lean black man, with grey in his beard and eyes that had seen too much suffering. He carried himself with the casual authority of someone who had navigated dangerous waters many times before. "You're the one with the impossible mind," he said without preamble. "Words already spreading about you. The slave who could speak Latin. The girl who poisoned the scientist." "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn said carefully. Marcus smiled. "Good answer. Keep giving that answer until you're far enough north that it doesn't matter. We leave in an hour. Bring only what you can carry. And understand this, once we start, there's no turning back. If you're caught, you hang." "If I'm caught, I hang. We're trusting each other with our lives." "I understand." They left Savannah in the dead of night, hidden in the back of a wagon carrying barrels of salt pork. Marcus drove with relaxed confidence, chatting with every checkpoint guard about weather and trade, never giving them reason to look too closely at his cargo. 3 hours outside the city, they stopped at a farmhouse where a Quaker family sheltered them in a hidden cellar beneath their barn. The family spoke little, moved efficiently, their help motivated by faith and conviction. They fed Evelyn, gave her clean clothes, told her the next leg of the journey would be the most dangerous. "You'll be traveling through plantation country," the Quaker father explained. "If you're seen and questioned, your papers may not be enough. Stay hidden, stay quiet. Trust only the people Reverend Marcus tells you to trust." For 2 weeks, Evelyn moved through the underground network like a ghost through walls. She hid in haylofts and root cellars, traveled by night in wagons and on foot, passed from one station to the next. Each person who helped her was risking everything: their freedom, their lives, their families. She met other fugitives too, men with scarred backs and haunted eyes, women clutching children, desperate to keep families together. Each had stories of brutality that made Whitmore's plantation seem almost mild by comparison. But Evelyn also met people who gave her hope. White conductors on the railroad who believed slavery was evil and risked everything to fight it. Free blacks who had made it north and now helped others escape. Former slaves who had bought their freedom and now worked to free others. In the safe house in Virginia, she met a woman named Sarah, not her mother, but close enough in age and experience to make Evelyn's heart ache. This Sarah had been a house slave in Richmond, had escaped after her master tried to sell her daughter. "They think we're stupid," Sarah said, feeding her own child by the fire. "They convince themselves we're simple, childlike, incapable of complex thought. Makes it easier to do what they do. But the truth is, they're the stupid ones. Stupid and cruel. Building their whole world on a lie and then acting surprised when it collapses. It hasn't collapsed yet," Evelyn pointed out. "It will," Sarah said with certainty. "Maybe not in our lifetime, maybe not in our children's lifetime, but lies can only stand so long. Truth is patient. Truth waits." In a barn in Maryland, Evelyn met a conductor named William, who had been a slave in Kentucky before escaping 15 years earlier. He now ran a newspaper in Philadelphia, publishing abolitionist literature and fugitive slave testimonials. "You can write?" he asked when someone mentioned Evelyn's capabilities. "Yes." "Good. We need writers. We need voices that can articulate the evil of slavery in terms the comfortable white North can't ignore. You make it North. You come find me. We'll put your mind to use." "I'm planning to teach," Evelyn said. "Teach through writing. Teach through testimony. Teach however you can. We need every weapon we can get. The final leg of the journey was by boat, crossing the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. Evelyn stood at the rail, feeling the cold northern wind, watching the lights of Philadelphia grow brighter in the darkness. Freedom, actual freedom. It felt unreal. The conductor who had arranged the boat passage, an older woman named Hannah, stood beside her. "It's different up here," she warned. "Free in law, but not free in practice. There's still prejudice. Still danger. Slave catchers can still come north, can still grab you and drag you back, and Pennsylvania has laws that can make it legal if they claim you're a fugitive." "So I'm not really free," Evelyn said. "You're freer than you were. That's something. That's worth fighting for." They docked in Philadelphia before dawn. Hannah took Evelyn to a boarding house in the Free Black Quarter, a neighborhood of narrow streets and cramped buildings where former slaves had built a community. "Rest today," Hannah instructed. "Tomorrow you start building a new life. You have skills, intelligence, use them, but be careful. Don't draw too much attention. There are people who won't want someone like you to succeed, who will see your intelligence as a threat." "I've been threatened my whole life," Evelyn said. "I'm used to it." She slept for 12 hours, the deepest sleep she'd had since childhood. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could hear the sounds of the city, vendors calling, children playing, a freedom of noise she'd never experienced. Evelyn went to the desk in her room and pulled out the papers she'd written in Savannah. She reviewed them, refined them, prepared them for publication. Then she wrote a letter to William, the newspaper editor she'd met in Maryland. "I am a witness," she began. "I am proof that everything you've been told about the natural inferiority of the enslaved is a lie. I can document it. I can prove it. And I'm ready to fight." She signed it with a new name, one she had been considering during the long journey north, Eleanor Freeman. Eleanor for the Queen of Aquitaine, a medieval woman known for intelligence and strength. Freeman for obvious reasons. Evelyn was dead, left behind in Georgia with her mother and her chains. Eleanor was who she would become. That afternoon, she walked through Philadelphia, seeing the city with new eyes. She saw schools where black children were learning to read, churches where free people worshipped without fear, meeting halls where abolitionists gathered to plan and organize. But she also saw the limitations, saw the neighborhoods where blacks weren't welcome, saw the newspapers that still printed racist caricatures and defended slavery, saw the comfortable northern whites who opposed slavery in theory but did nothing in practice. There was so much work to do. At a bookstore, she found copies of The Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist newspaper. She read his words, passionate, uncompromising, demanding immediate emancipation, and felt something kindle in her chest. This was her war now, not fought with weapons, but with words and ideas, and the irrefutable proof of her own existence. She returned to her room and continued writing, essays that would be published under pseudonyms, testimonials that would shock northern audiences, logical arguments that would dismantle slavery's intellectual foundations, one careful sentence at a time. Master Whitmore's journal sat on the desk, a time bomb waiting to explode. She would release portions of it slowly, strategically, letting the slaveholder's own words condemn him and his system. But first, she needed to establish herself, needed to build credibility, needed to become someone who couldn't be easily dismissed or captured. Eleanor Freeman began to plan her next moves, her mind working with the same precision and patience that had kept Evelyn alive for 20 years. She was free now, yes, but freedom was just the beginning. The real work was destroying the system that had enslaved her. And she had all the weapons she needed: her impossible mind, her perfect memory, and her absolute determination to burn down every comfortable lie that kept slavery standing. 5 months after arriving in Philadelphia, Eleanor Freeman published her first essay under the name A Witness. It appeared in William's newspaper, The Voice of Freedom, and it detonated across the abolitionist movement like a carefully placed explosive. The essay was titled, "The Mathematics of Cruelty: Why Slavery Cannot Be Reformed, Only Destroyed." In it, Eleanor laid out a precise logical argument, building from first principles to demonstrate that slavery's economic foundation required ever-increasing brutality to maintain itself. She included statistics stolen from Master Whitmore's journals, showing how planters calculated the optimal balance between feeding slaves enough to work and working them hard enough to maximize profit before they died. But what shocked readers most was the voice itself. Clear, educated, methodical. This was not the emotional appeal of most abolitionist writing. This was philosophy and mathematics, presented with the cool authority of a university scholar. The essay ended with a devastating question. If I, who was raised in bondage with no formal education, can articulate these arguments, what does that say about the intelligence and morality of those who claim natural superiority while defending an indefensible institution? The response was immediate and violent. Pro-slavery newspapers called it a hoax, insisted no former slave could write with such sophistication. They accused white abolitionists of ventriloquism, of putting words in the mouth of a fictional character to advance their agenda, which was exactly what Eleanor wanted. Let them deny it, she told William when he showed her the attacks. Let them insist it's impossible for someone like me to exist. Then, when I prove them wrong, their entire worldview collapses. She gave her first public speech 6 weeks later at a small abolitionist meeting in a church basement. Word had spread about a witness, and the room was packed with curious supporters and hostile skeptics who had come to expose the fraud. Eleanor stood before them in a simple grey dress, her hands folded calmly. She looked younger than her 20 years, small and unimposing. The skeptics smiled, certain they were about to witness an embarrassing performance by a coached puppet. "I will speak for 10 minutes, Eleanor announced. "Then I will answer any question you pose, on any subject you choose. If I fail to demonstrate adequate knowledge, you may dismiss everything I've written as fabrication. If I succeed, you must reckon with the implications." She spoke without notes, presenting arguments about natural rights and social contract theory that drew directly from Locke, Rousseau, and Paine. She quoted Greek philosophers in the original language, referenced obscure legal precedents, drew mathematical proofs on a chalkboard to demonstrate slavery's economic inefficiency. The skeptics tried to catch her out. They asked questions in Latin. She answered in Latin. They posed complex mathematical problems. She solved them instantly. They challenged her knowledge of history, philosophy, science. She met every challenge with calm precision, her perfect memory providing her with exact quotations and specific citations. By the end, the room sat in stunned silence. "How?" someone finally asked. "I listened," Eleanor said simply. "I remembered. I taught myself by observing my enslavers, by stealing glimpses of their books, by understanding that knowledge was the one thing they couldn't take from me if they didn't know I possessed it. Every slave is smarter than their masters believe. I am simply proof of what happens when that intelligence is given the chance to flourish." The story spread. Within weeks, Eleanor Freeman was being invited to speak at larger venues. Abolitionist societies wanted her testimony. Newspapers wanted interviews. She was becoming famous, which was both useful and dangerous. The fame brought resources. Wealthy abolitionists offered funding. Publishers wanted her to write a book. She was invited to teach at a school for free black children, where she developed curriculum that treated students as intellectually capable rather than as charity cases requiring remedial help. But fame also brought danger. Slave catchers heard about the brilliant former slave who was making her masters look foolish. Bounty hunters came north, looking for a girl named Evelyn who had disappeared from Georgia. Sympathetic sources warned Eleanor that there was a price on her head, $500 for her return or proof of her death. She increased her precautions, varied her routes, stayed with different families. She began writing letters to her mother through the Underground Railroad network, carefully worded messages that let Sarah know she was alive and well, without providing details that could be used against her. One letter came back with devastating news. Master Whitmore had discovered Evelyn's escape route, had tortured Cobb, the overseer, for information. In revenge, Whitmore had sold half the plantation's slaves south to cotton plantations in Louisiana, tearing apart families that had lived together for generations. Sarah was still there, but she wrote that the plantation had become a place of terror, Whitmore's rage at his humiliation making him more brutal than ever. Eleanor read the letter alone in her room and wept for the first time since leaving Georgia. Her freedom had come at a terrible price for those left behind, but she couldn't let that stop her. She could only fight harder. She began releasing excerpts from Master Whitmore's journal, each one more damning than the last. His private admissions of slavery's evil, his acknowledgement that he whipped people for asserting their humanity, his calculations on breeding slaves for profit, his casual mentions of rape presented as property management. The excerpts were published anonymously but widely distributed. They were read into the congressional record by abolitionist representatives. They were quoted in newspapers across the North. They became ammunition in the growing ideological war over slavery. In Georgia, Whitmore's reputation crumbled. Other planters distanced themselves from him, disgusted not by his actions, but by his stupidity in writing them down. His business suffered as northern banks became reluctant to extend credit to someone whose moral bankruptcy was so thoroughly documented. Thomas wrote to Eleanor once, a letter that reached her through circuitous channels. In it, he described his father's decline, the plantation's deteriorating finances, his own moral struggle to decide what to do with an inheritance built on evil. "I want to free them," Thomas wrote, "all of them. But my father still lives, and the debts are such that freeing them would mean bankruptcy. I am trapped by circumstances and my own cowardice. You were braver than I could ever be." Eleanor didn't write back. There was nothing she could say that would absolve him or solve his dilemma. A year after her first speech, Eleanor was invited to speak at Faneuil Hall in Boston, the same hall where revolutionaries had planned independence from Britain. The irony wasn't lost on her. She would be arguing for a second American Revolution in the birthplace of the first. The hall was packed. Abolitionists filled the main floor, but the galleries held skeptics, pro-slavery sympathizers, and people genuinely curious about the phenomenon of the educated slave. Eleanor stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. She thought about her mother, still enslaved in Georgia, about the children she taught, who deserved a future free from the chains of prejudice, about every person still suffering in bondage, whose intelligence and humanity were denied daily. She began to speak. "Gentlemen and ladies of Boston, you pride yourselves on being the cradle of liberty, yet liberty in America is a lie unless it applies to all. You celebrate your revolution against tyranny while tolerating the greatest tyranny ever devised. You speak of inalienable rights while 3 million people are denied every right simply because of their skin color." The room tensed, but she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I am told I am exceptional, that my intelligence is an aberration that proves the rule of racial inferiority. But I tell you this, every slave is intelligent enough to desire freedom. Every slave is human enough to feel love and pain and hope. The only difference between me and them is opportunity. The only difference between me and you is that I have had to fight for every scrap of knowledge you were given freely." She spoke for an hour, presenting arguments so carefully constructed that even her opponents couldn't find logical flaws. She quoted their own philosophers against them, used their own legal principles to demolish slavery's foundation, turned their own Christianity into an indictment of their hypocrisy. When she finished, the applause from the abolitionists was deafening. But more importantly, some of the skeptics were quiet, thoughtful. Seeds had been planted. That night, Eleanor returned to her boarding house to find a letter waiting. It bore no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. Master Whitmore's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it. "You think you've won," he wrote. "You think your cleverness has destroyed me, but you've only proven my point. You are unnatural, monstrous, a freak of nature that should have been destroyed before you could spread your poison. I am ruined, yes. My reputation is gone. My fortune is fading, but I will have the satisfaction of knowing you will never be safe. Every slave catcher in the South knows your face now. Every bounty hunter wants the reward. You can run, you can hide, you can write your pretty speeches, but you will always be looking over your shoulder, and one day your luck will run out. I'll die knowing that you'll die in chains, exactly as you deserve." Eleanor read the letter twice, then burned it in the candle flame. She sat alone in the darkness, watching the ashes curl and blacken. Whitmore was right about one thing. She would never be truly safe as long as slavery existed. Her freedom was provisional, contingent, fragile, but that knowledge didn't weaken her resolve. It strengthened it, because if she couldn't be free while slavery stood, then slavery had to fall. Completely, totally. No compromise, no gradual abolition, no colonization schemes or half measures. The entire rotten structure had to be destroyed. Eleanor pulled out fresh paper and began to write again. This time, she wrote directly to slaves in the South, letters that would be smuggled through the Underground Railroad network, letters that taught reading in code, letters that explained their legal rights in free states, letters that told them they were not alone, that freedom was possible, that someone who had walked their path now fought for them. She wrote to Northern lawmakers, presenting careful economic arguments for immediate emancipation. She wrote to churches using scripture to demolish religious justifications for slavery. She wrote to newspapers, creating a relentless drumbeat of moral and intellectual opposition. Her work became her life. Teaching during the day, writing at night, speaking whenever invited. She trained other former slaves to speak and write, building a network of voices that could no longer be dismissed as aberrations. 5 years after her escape, Eleanor heard that Master Whitmore had died. Bankrupt, disgraced, killed by a stroke while screaming at a slave who had dropped a water pitcher. The plantation was sold to pay debts. The enslaved people scattered to other plantations. Eleanor's mother was among those sold. She ended up in South Carolina, and Eleanor lost contact with her for 3 long years. Then, in 1831, a letter arrived. Sarah had been freed by her new master's will, and she was making her way north. She would arrive in Philadelphia within the month. Eleanor stood at the dock when the ship came in, scanning the passengers for the mother she hadn't seen in 8 years. When Sarah finally appeared, she was older, grayer, bent from years of labor, but her eyes were clear and bright when she saw her daughter. They held each other without speaking, tears flowing freely for all the years lost, all the suffering endured, all the hope that had kept them both alive. "You did it," Sarah whispered. "You got free. You did everything you said you would." "We're not done yet," Eleanor said. "Not until everyone is free." That night, mother and daughter sat together in Eleanor's small room, and Eleanor showed Sarah everything she had written, everything she had accomplished. Sarah couldn't read most of it, but she understood its importance. "Your mind," Sarah said, touching Eleanor's face gently. "I always knew you were special, always knew they were wrong about you, about all of us. But I was so scared they'd hurt you for it." "They tried," Eleanor said. "They failed." In the distance, church bells rang midnight, a new day beginning, a new chapter in the long fight for freedom and justice. Eleanor Freeman sat at her desk while her mother slept, and she continued to write. Words that would become weapons, ideas that would become ammunition, truth that would eventually shatter the lies holding slavery in place. She was no longer the frightened girl who had memorized sermons in secret. She was a voice that could not be silenced, a mind that had proven the emptiness of every justification for bondage, a living refutation of every racist theory. They had called her cursed, the enslaved had called her a miracle. History would call her impossible, but Eleanor Freeman knew the truth. She was exactly what happened when humanity was given the chance to flourish despite every attempt to crush it. She was proof that intelligence recognizes no racial boundaries, that genius can emerge from the most oppressive circumstances, that the human spirit cannot be permanently broken. And she would make sure that truth echoed through history, carried on the wings of her words, until every chain was broken and every slave was free. The work continued. The fight continued. And Eleanor Freeman, the woman with the impossible mind, continued to be the nightmare that slaveholders had always feared, someone who understood exactly what they were and had the voice to tell the world.